Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, under new management, CBA chiefs Matt Comyn and Catherine Livingstone shift the blame onto former CEO Ian Narev and the previous board. Extraordinary exchanges at the Royal Commission, all the latest with chief reporter Leo Shanahan. Brand power drives AACo's strategy as the markets and the drought converge to deliver a tough half for the business. Chief Hugh Killen on weathering the markets. And a good day for Dave Sharma, the Israeli tech business he chairs. Shekel Brainway defies the tech slump, rising 5% on its first day of ASX trading, and reports that he'll recontest Wentworth at the forthcoming election. We'll see what he's got to say about that. Now, CBA Chief Executive Matt Comyn has revealed he argued with his predecessor Ian Narev over dud insurance products that were ripping off customers by tens of millions of dollars. Appearing on the stand for his second day of evidence in front of the Banking Royal Commission, Mr Comyn revealed he had a robust discussion with his predecessor Mr Narev, producing notes from a May 2015 meeting pointing to his fears on the failures of the product. Well, we also heard from CBA Chair Catherine Livingstone today. I think she's got more to go tomorrow, though, who says she was also surprised by the complacency of her predecessors. For more on what went down today, Your Money Chief Business Reporter Leo Shanahan joins me live at the desk. Another extraordinary day at the Royal Commission.
Yes, I thought this was even more so than yesterday, really. I mean, where we finished yesterday at that point of, well, was Narev doing a good enough job in addressing this issue of these dodgy insurance products on mortgages and on loans and credit cards? You know, Comyn yesterday was saying, oh, well, no, not really. Today, outright, not only said he disagreed with it, not only said he took it up with him and consistently took it up with him and lost the fight, he was asked directly about the former leadership and he said it wasn't good enough. So I think this is pretty amazing coming from Matt Comyn, who, of course,
was part of the leadership, has to be said.
Yes, was one of the leadership, and was also, you know, Narev was one of his mentors throughout this process.
Well, exactly. I mean, it was a very much, he was the chosen one, wasn't he? So it must be, I mean, goodness knows what the relationship, we haven't heard from Ian Narev at all, have we, in all of this?
Look, it was a fascinating account of this meeting or series of meetings, but I must say the paper trail tends to favour Matt Comyn. It's all there in black and white.
Yes, of course.
When he's saying, look, these products have poor customer outcomes, it's unclear, multi-channeling, you know, just basically saying he didn't think it was worth it and it would hurt the bank in the long run. And he said he went into this meeting, which he's produced notes from, and at one point was told to temper your sense of justice by Ian Narev, and said he had a robust discussion over the issue and lost to Ian Narev and other parts of the bank that wanted to maintain this product. But look, have a listen to Matt Comyn's own testimony on this meeting as in 2015.
Do you feel that CBA has had the right leaders in the past?
No.
Do you feel that they have the right leaders now?
We will see. I hope so, yes. Clearly, the process for me, but for the entire organisation, of going through these matters in great detail and understanding the similarities and the propositions that you're putting to me are quite correct. We didn't sufficiently prioritise customers. We didn't understand the potential for harm, and I think I called that out specifically in the witness statement. Some of the repeated failures was we didn't actually understand our products and their use in life and sufficiently understand the hazards that we were either creating, or in other occasions that sometimes the way those products could be used by customers for harm in the context of the way credit cards may be used in problematic ways. We simply didn't have a good and sufficiently well-structured way of understanding those issues.
Well, I think that first grab was pretty extraordinary when he was just asked, did they have the right leadership in the past, and he just point-blankly answered no.
Yeah.
He didn't qualify that. Was there an easier way to answer that question? I'm not sure, because if he did qualify it, they'd say, well, who was bad, who was good?
Yes.
But ultimately, that's a pretty stinging well, rebuttal to the former leadership, really.
Yeah. But interestingly, you know, Greg Medcraft at ASIC, against whom loads of things have been said, has actually come back with a few comments. We haven't heard from Ian Narev.
No, and I think Ian Narev will keep quiet, short of... I mean, look,
I mean, he was about the shareholder. He worked from beginning to end of his job for the shareholder, didn't he?
Yeah, and it would be interesting...
Whatever he said on camera.
...to see how Narev would have fared in Royal Commission environment. I think very well. But would have he put a lot of, you know, blame on his predecessors? I can't help but think he would have done
well,
much
I
of the same
don't know how
thing.
he would have actually handled it, because, again, he, to the bitter end, said there wasn't a problem with culture.
Yeah.
And I think after the APRA report, he would have had to have changed his tune.
Well, and Commons come out straight away and said there's a problem with culture.
Exactly.
And look, someone else who was asked about culture was Catherine Livingstone today and the board. So once Matt Common was finished, the chair took the stand, and look, she was drilled on her approach to the board from the outset. Don't forget, even though she became chair in 2017, she was on the board since the beginning of about 2016. So she was asked about her concerns, and she immediately said, look, there was a lack of challenge. I was concerned, and they said, well, why didn't you take it up with them? She said, oh, well, I was a newbie, effectively. I thought I'd give it 6 months before I asserted myself. But look, have a listen to Catherine Livingstone on some of her thoughts on the CBA board when she arrived.
What were your views of the operation of the board during that time under the previous chair?
So I was quite surprised by the lack of challenge.
What surprised you about it? Was it inconsistent with the style and frequency of challenge that you'd seen on the other boards that you'd been part of?
That's correct.
So you were surprised by the lack of challenge. Did you have any other views of the operation of the board during that 10 months before you took over as chair?
Well, I think the point that the Prudential Inquiry made about the follow-up of issues, I think that the urgency there and the degree of follow-up in general terms was not what I'd been accustomed to.
So Catherine Livingstone being drilled on. Actually, she makes reference to the APRA report. Now, that was obviously done as a result of the Australia scandal, which she was questioned on, and her awareness of this. I mean, there was three regulatory warnings by the time she had gotten to the board, and she was made aware of that.
Well, remember, Greg Medcraft was very disappointed in her behaviour with Australia.
Yes, and I mean, she was aware that there were these three warnings, effectively, or regulatory flags from Australia. She said she asked about it, and she was told, look, we're working with Australia. We're providing a lot of information to them, and ultimately it'll all be okay, seemed to be the message. But this obviously kicked off the report from APRA and a range of other reviews of the Commonwealth Bank.
Yes.
But look, she accepted that culture was a problem, and in fact accepts that culture continually needs to change, which is probably a more sophisticated view of the situation. But have a look at Catherine Livingstone on culture.
The Prudential Inquiry made a number of findings about CBA's culture, very critical findings about CBA's culture. Do you accept that CBA needs to continue changing its culture?
Well, it does, and as you know, and I think from Mr. Commons' evidence, for example, in terms of the behavioural norms, we now have a very clear code of conduct which establishes expectations that are linked to values, linked to the question of should we rather than can we, and then what you do if you have an issue, how you speak up and how you escalate it. So that is a very clear statement of the expectation of the behavioural norms in the culture, which was not there.
So Catherine Livingstone continuing tomorrow in the stand. I expect her to be done by about lunchtime. It could go longer. It's hard to say exactly. And then we're expecting Brian Hartzer, the CEO of Westpac. It will be very interesting to see how he travels, given he's been in the job for a while. Yes. And he hasn't taken as a diplomatic route as others.
No, he hasn't. So which is this, as I say, under new management. I mean, it is very interesting. Although we'll see what happens with Catherine Livingstone tomorrow as well. You're not out till you're out, are you? Yeah. Leah Shanahan, thank you very much. And for a live stream of the Royal Commission proceedings this week and the latest commentary, head to yourmoney.com.au/royal. The Australian Agricultural Company, AACO, felt the full force of drought and tough price competition thanks to a lift in the global beef supply in the last half, a second half cash flow loss of $83 million. And it took a substantial markdown on the value of the herd. That said, revenues actually jumped 11% to $219 million, and AACO said that greater price competition had been partially offset by an increase in the price of Wagyu beef. Well, for more on those results, I spoke with AACO CEO Hugh Killen a little earlier. Hugh Killen, very nice to catch you on your half-year results. I guess this is at the time when the premium branding strategy really comes into its own, given the conditions out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me again, Ticky. It's a pleasure to be back. And absolutely, today is all about our premium branded strategy and how our brands work and protect the company and how we're going to grow the company going forward. So you'll see in the way that we've been talking about the company, in the way we've even presented in our decks, it's a very different look and feel as we actually lean into being a branded business.
So the conditions out there, the drought obviously, particularly in some of your southern properties, how have you gone?
Yeah, it's been a particularly difficult time, not just for AACO but the industry more broadly. There's been an impact in our operational line from feeding costs. It's a significant impact in terms of our cost of production in the first half of the year. It's above $20 million impact. So that wasn't planned. So it's obviously having a, it's a break on the business as such in the first half. However, we're really happy with the results that we've released through an operating profit this year and also the turnaround in cash flow, notwithstanding those extra costs that have come as an impact of the drought.
But you're having to bring sales forward of some of the herd, yes?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are playing out there, and the numbers are a little bit confusing this year because we've got the two really difficult decisions that we made this year around Livingston beef and the suspension of the 1824 supply chain playing out as well. So we obviously, when we decided not to support 1824 earlier on, we realised we were going to have cattle to sell.
Just explain what 1824 is.
Sorry, 1824 was one of our branded beef programs, and in the cattle industry that's a 100-day grain-fed program, and from an AACO perspective that wasn't profitable, and so we've made a decision to stop doing that. What that means for us in our supply chain, Ticky, is that we have extra cattle to sell because they're not been turned into beef. So you're seeing in our numbers this year a cash flow benefit from cattle that we sold, and we sold some of those early because of seasonal conditions, but also because we actually don't need them as beef anymore and we sell them as animals. And
it's a tough market, not just here, as you mentioned, everybody else is in the same boat really, but equally it's a tough market in some of your export markets, particularly in the US.
It's a really interesting one. I don't think people in Australia realise, but the US is actually in drought as well. And so what we're seeing in the US is an increased kill-off in the US market as well, combined with US export markets opening up for beef. So there's a kind of a double whammy there in a way, that we're seeing more US beef anyway as they open up markets from a competitive standpoint, but also there's more volume coming out as well for kind of similar reasons to what we're seeing here.
So you've moved away from your volume strategically, if you like, into the premium brand area. What's happened to your stocks at that end of the market?
Well, so the US compete in some of the markets that we're in, not all, and they compete at the top end of their USDA choice market, which is their premium product, and so that impacts us in terms of some of our brand, but not all. And so it doesn't in any way cover us in terms of all of our brands, and we have very high quality, high premium brands that the US doesn't get to from their market perspective.
And have those cattle numbers gone up?
In our business they have. We've invested heavily in our premium Wagyu herd this year. It's another one of the impacts we've got, but we won't compromise on quality and brand. And when we talk about our Westholme and Wallara, which are our super premium brands, we want to make sure we have the right animals bred and ready to go into those supply chains. So that's a cost that we're incurring in this tough time.
How are the markets going? How are your export markets going?
The export markets are going pretty well. Prices are lower this year in the Wagyu business across the board globally, but we've got good amount of volumes and sales that have actually managed to replace that. So in our Westholme and Wallara brands, we've actually held pricing flat period on period, which we're really happy about. And the overall, our Heartland brands is lower, but volume's higher, so we've actually managed to grow that business.
And you're opening up in Dubai now?
We've just opened up, we've just launched in Dubai. And what that means is we've gone from one of our historic brands into the Westholme market. We've had a 60% conversion in the first 2 weeks. We're working glove in hand with our distributor there, and we're very, very excited about that because that conversion happens in a very high value market, and it's actually a step forward to us in terms of opening up in other higher value markets as well, so we're very pleased.
And elsewhere, I mean, you're in Taiwan, you're in Singapore. Elsewhere, presumably, are you into China? Because that would be a huge market, one would think.
Yes, Ticky. So our brands, our what we call our heartland brands, we have a big footprint across Asia, which includes China. We obviously have a footprint into Europe and the US. So China's an opportunity. Everyone talks about the China opportunity. You need to be thoughtful from a brand perspective. So when we talk about Westholme and Wylara, while there's an opportunity in China, we need to be very careful and thoughtful with the way that we activate our brands going.
So that people think about Alibaba, and I know you've got Jessica Rudd on the board as well, but presumably this sort of high-end delivery comes right into restaurants. You're doing it in a very high-end way, are you?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of macro factors that are going on in terms of the way that people consume food. And Alibaba is a good example of direct to home, and I think we hear a lot about it in China. And in fact, I was there 2 weeks ago and saw it happening where you can order on your app your steak meal, and it'll be at your doorstep when you get home. And I think that's an increasing trend in China that, from our strategy sessions, that we're absolutely looking at and seeing is there something we can be doing about that in the future. You need to be able to protect your provenance is the point. And so, the Australian story is very strong in China, but you need to be very careful and thoughtful with the way you actually enter into it.
Just in terms of going back to Livingston beef, which you put on ice, have we seen the last of the costs there?
So Livingston, I think we talked about this last time we spoke, and we were talking about putting Livingston in a suspended state, and the term that I used then was to keep it in a condition that we could restart it as efficiently as we possibly can, should we choose to do that.
But beef prices are going to have to go up even more than they are now.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting dynamic. That far northern business is divorced in terms of the way the pricing works to the southern markets, and so that's actually more correlated to live export, which is quite robust at the moment from a pricing perspective. So Livingston's in that in that suspended state. And there will be ongoing costs from that, but they're not material, and it's something we've budgeted for, and they're well within our budgets. You mentioned
Hugh, live export there. Now, in the election campaign, this is possibly one of the issues which will come up between now and the federal election. How do you see the state of the live export, and what thinking is being done to transition, potentially dramatically reduce or get out of live export?
Yeah, I'm absolutely certain it's going to be a topic as we go into the election, and I think the pictures we've seen in the sheep live export trade are, I use the word reprehensible, and they're not acceptable anyway anywhere in the industry. And this is not a defensive term. I think the cattle industry had its watershed moment when live export was banned, and has put in together right protections throughout the supply chain with SCAS. So it's a very different situation. In fact, my Chief Operating Officer Anna Spear has just been throughout the entire live export chain from port all the way through to feedlot and also processing facilities in Asia. And the SCAS requirements that the government's put in place are very, very high quality. And I think the beef cattle industry live export is a very different situation to long haul sheep.
So do you see it continuing, or do you see political pressure actually, or public backlash putting a lot of pressure on it?
Yeah, for me, I think there's going to have to be a transition no matter what happens. And I think over time, producers will think about live export and how exposed they want to be to it. My personal opinion is we'll probably see, it'll probably tail off at some point in the future. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think it's a very important part of the northern beef industry. So it's well governed at this state, but it'll be naive not to think that it's not going to be an election issue, and we'll see what happens through that piece. I would say that the opposition have been they've been quite supportive of agriculture in the north, and obviously live export makes up a part of that.
In terms of other opportunities for you, I mean, you're sitting there with 1% of the landmass of Australia. Are there other opportunities for AACO?
There absolutely are, Ticky. And you can have really logical opportunities like irrigation. In the Gulf, there's a lot of story at the moment around cotton being grown in the Ord, for instance, and we're playing around with some of the waterway allocations we've got, and is there something that we can litigate both in terms of other crops but also cattle?
But actually run yourself, or actually contract out to do it?
Well, early days in terms of that thinking. It could be either or. The other piece is if you go to Blue Sky, for instance, this is the beautiful thing about having a branded business, and we think about the premiumisation of both the Wylara and and West Home brands, and that they have the essence of Australia in them as we take the magic of Australia to our diners. And we have some of the most wonderful tracts of land in Australia, and so bringing people from offshore into that as well is an opportunity as well.
So tourism?
Yeah, tourism could be something we do, or business tourism is at a minimum. So as we think about our brands and as you think about AACo, I'd just be asking people, you know, to understand our heritage as a beef business, but as we go forward, we're a brand business, and there's a whole lot of really interesting things we can do with our assets around brand.
You've done a lot of work around your management team. You've got new people on board. Some questions around the high corporate costs that this has involved.
I actually make no apologies for hiring the best people in the world to lead this transformation of this company. This is a nearly 200-year-old beef cattle business. In fact, it's done a lot of things in its 200 years. What we're doing with AACo now is turning into a premium branded business. And the likes of that haven't been done in Australia before. And so we need the right executives. We need people like Nigel Simmons, our CFO, who has deep FMCG experience, and that's a real change in mindset around how you measure and run performance across the business. Yeah. And so also Vincent Brune, our Chief Marketing Officer, who's coming in now, comes from a very high brand marketing situation as well. So when we think about our brands and market, we need people to bring them in. There's a cost to that, number one. And number two, the other piece that I won't, we'll take our time on brand. There's an impact to that brand from a cost perspective, and we're absolutely going to hold the course in that. So you'll see those costs tick up a little bit. I'd like to see our revenue ticking up a bit as well, so that ratio will improve somewhat.
Okay, finally, you don't give official guidance, but the outlook. Can you give us any hint of what you're facing?
Yeah, and look, I've spoken...
For investors?
Yeah, no, and I've spoken about this in my prepared remarks. It's, you know, the drought. There has been rain through northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. That's a really good thing. And in fact, in some of our operations have had significant rain. However, it's not drought breaking by any stretch of the imagination. And the absence of a winter crop for lot feeders more broadly is going to be an issue in the second half of the year. So our input costs are going to remain elevated. So those drought impacts will stay. They'll stay for us and they'll stay for other people as well. The big, I think, swing factor in the Australian beef industry is going to be the wet. If we get a really good northern wet, then I think that will buoy the industry and we'll see relief for everyone because we'll have cattle that we can get on to feed in the north. So it's a really balanced situation, which is one of the reasons why we don't give guidance. But all eyes are on the weather, but it will be a difficult market for us over the next few months.
Well, let's hope it's thumbs up for you. And thank you very much for joining me, Hugh.
Thanks, Ticky. Thank you very much for having me.
After the break, discussing business opportunities for Australia in India with India's High Commissioner to Australia, Dr Ajay Gondane. Next.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. India's President Ram Nath Kovind will land in Australia tomorrow for the AFR India Business Summit, where he'll engage in talks with our own Prime Minister Scott Morrison. It is a big deal. I think it's the first time an Indian president has been to Australia. On the agenda, opportunities for Australian investment in India, which is on track to become the world's third largest economy. And in Sydney today, in preparation for the visit, India's High Commissioner to Australia, Dr Ajay Gondane, who I'm pleased to say joins me live at the desk. High Commissioner, it's very nice to have you on the show.
It is wonderful. It's very nice to be here.
So this is a big deal, having the President come down.
Indeed. Yeah. This is the first presidential visit to Australia.
So what's he going to get up to?
You see, Australia-India relations are moving in a very positive direction and in an upward trajectory. And this visit is likely to give further boost to that trajectory.
Yeah. There was really a very seminal piece of work done recently by Peter Varghese, and we interviewed Peter on the show. He wrote this India Economic Strategy to 2035 for the government. Now, that pulled back from a free trade, work on a free trade agreement. So how do you see our relationship, our trade relationship and opportunity?
The India Economic Strategy is a very well-crafted document, and it contains, it's a very expansive document, and we have welcomed it. It does not say that this pulling back from the FTA, what we call is Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, CECA.
Yes, right.
It is not that. That is going on in parallel,
yes.
And we have had 9 rounds of talks there.
Yes.
And the last time it was discussed during our Commerce Minister's visit in July this year. we have requested the meeting of the chief negotiators and exchange of lists. So that track is going on.
Right, okay, but it's, I suppose, if you think back to the days of Andrew Robb as Trade Minister, when we were ticking off the free trade agreements with everybody all through Asia, I mean, it has proved, obviously, there are some sensitivities in India with tariffs, so there are other ways to move forward on...
Indeed, there are other ways of engaging bilaterally. For instance, investments. That channel is open. Also, the trade is not that big. It's around $27 billion, and it can be multiplied within a span of, say, 4 or 5 years.
Well, that's what the report indicated, wasn't it? It could triple easily.
Easily. Because there's a lot of potential in India. There's, of course, too much potential here.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that I would assume that the President is coming down to do is sort of leverage the great Indian diaspora, which is, how many Australian Indians are there here?
It said that it's around 500,000 diaspora, which is Indian origin.
Wow.
And another 200 of Indian origin, but coming from other countries like Fiji, Singapore, South Africa, Malaysia, like that.
Right, okay. Including, I think, Dave Sharma, whose father was, who's on the show a little bit later. That's exactly right. So leveraging this sort of 700,000 odd Indian diaspora, and I guess also looking at the reform journey that India itself is on under Prime Minister Modi, because there have been big steps made there.
Indeed, very many big steps. First, I'll speak on diaspora. Diaspora has been very progressive here, because we have basically mostly the skilled and highly skilled people coming here. That has sort of increased the understanding and interest of India amongst the Australians. So it's a very good basis for our relationship. As for your question about what is that?
You mean investment?
Investment.
Yeah, and trade?
Investment and trade. So what happens is this $27 billion which we are seeing now, it is a result of, like, in 2013, the trade was, say, only $15 billion. To 2018, it's become 27. Yeah. So you see the growth rate and trajectory. So it's very positive. Investments are also around that figure. But what happens is, now, at this present moment, when India is expanding in such a concerted and in such a sustained way, now is the time for Australians to sort of pitch in.
Yes, yes, and our knowledge, I suppose, of India is not the same as our knowledge of China. There was this deliberate pivot to China, and yet now we see, partly it's the geopolitics, the rebalancing. Well, we had Shinzo Abe here from Japan just last week, and now we have the President of India. So this is, and of course there's the quadrilaterals that were looked at again at APEC. It is a bit of a rebalancing for Australia.
The quadrilateral meeting is a regular feature in the last 2 years. Last year we have twice, and this year also the quadrilateral met in Singapore. But it is at a Director General level in Singapore, on the margins of the EAS summit.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Very good. It is at a Secretary General level, and as it expands and as it sort of deepens, then we can have things, more things covered into it.
So, looking at possible Australian investment in India, interestingly, I was speaking with Sanjeev Gupta the other day, and now he has looked at and has invested in steel mills in India. And when I asked him about it, he said, "Oh, I'm not expecting great returns yet, because I'm there for the long-term investment, because that is the story, bringing India up in terms of, you know, the income, raising the income."
See, India's economy is, first of all, the structure of the Indian economy is such that it is very likely to grow at 8% plus in the next 20 years, because of the demographic structure, because of the savings rate, because of the dependency ratios and all that. Secondly, it is the reforms that has been carried out in India. In the last 4 years, the reforms have accelerated. First of all, the reform on the taxation. We have also, you have had the experience in GST. We also implemented a nationwide one tax on goods and services. So that makes it very easy for businessmen to determine where his or her business will be located, because it is uniform all over the country. Similarly, there have been several reforms on the sectors which directly impinge and affect the economy. Therefore, what happened? When we started in 2014, our doing business with India, the index was, we were somewhere 144.
Yes.
Next year it came to 133. Next year it came to 100. And now this latest figures this year, we have come to 77. So the trajectory is such that within a very few years, we will be within the first 50 and top of the 50 like that.
Right.
So the business environment is increasing. The structural, the structure of the Indian economy is such that it's very propitious for expansion, growth over a long period, over a period of 20 to 25 years.
And the sectors that are obviously talked about a lot, health, education, tourism.
Indeed. It is in the Verghese report. These are, because education is like the flagship sector.
Yes.
Is identified. There is tourism, there is health, agribusinesses, mining, sports, several, there are 10 areas which the recommendations
are for
focusing.
is going ahead. It seems to be.
It looks like, yes. Apparently, they have taken, obtained some 1,200 approvals.
Yeah.
So it's over a period of so many, 4 or 5 years.
It's been, wow. Yeah, well, we'll look forward to covering the President as he comes over and listening to what he's going to say. But Dr Ajay Gondane, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much.
Nice to talk. OK, well, coming up after the break, Dave Sharma, chairman of newly listed company Shekel Brainway, and the former Liberal candidate for Wentworth. Next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Yes, welcome back. Well, Shekel Brainway, an Israeli company specialising in weighing technology, debuted on the ASX today. The company, worth around 49 mil, develops specialised equipment for the retail, healthcare and manufacturing sectors, listing at 35 cents a share. It got as high as 37 cents. That's up over 5%. Not bad for a small tech company debuting on a day the market closed negative, down around 0.5%. Well, Shekel Brainway's chairman is Dave Sharma, who you might recognise as the not-so-successful, so far, Liberal candidate for Wentworth last month. Dave Sharma actually joins me live at the desk. Well, Dave Sharma, congratulations are in order today, though, aren't they, on the company you're chairing?
Yeah, better day today than the 20th of October for me.
So this is quite extraordinary, I think, that the share price has moved up so much, particularly when tech stocks have been getting such a pounding.
Yeah, look, it is a tough market out there, and particularly for tech stocks, particularly, you see the big American tech giants.
So what's the difference here?
Well, look, I think this is a good long-term value proposition. And look, I'm pleased that the share price has ended up where it is today. It's up about 5 or 6%, which is how you want to start off, of course. But you know, investors should be in this stock for the medium to long term. I mean, we're raising money. We're existing profitable business, but we're raising money to move into the autonomous retail and sort of smart inventory.
Do you
space.
think it's because it's more proven than a startup, that it's got this better reception?
Well, I think it is a little different because it's already profitable, the company. It's already got revenue. It's got established customer lines, supply lines, manufacturers. So it's more mature than a startup, even though we're raising money to move into a
I'm fascinated by the name. Shekel Brainway.
So shekel actually...
Shekel's money, isn't it?
Shekel is the Israeli currency, but it actually comes from the Hebrew verb to weigh, or to weigh something. So they called the currency after the unit of measurement that they would use in scales to weigh the value of a wheat or some sort of commodity. And, and shekel, hence to weigh, means, and we're in the digital weighing business, so we've called our company Shekel.
So what is so awesome about this technology?
Well, look, it's basically it's marrying existing technology, so digital weighing technology with big data and artificial intelligence. So you can get very high-resolution pictures of what's on your supermarket shelves or what's on your warehouses or your factory floors using digital weighing technology that's all integrated, linked up, and provides a picture of sort of live inventory management, real-time inventory management.
So it doesn't just weigh?
No, it weighs, but also communicates, and it can identify. It's very high resolution, so it can identify the fact that you've taken, a tube of toothpaste from one particular shelf at the back and taken it out. It can be used in things like grab-and-go autonomous retail stores where you take the goods off the shelf and rather than having to scan them at the checkout, you just take them and put them in your cart or in your shopping bag and off you go.
Golly, OK. So it's not, as I was thinking, just about sort of unpriced goods like fruit and potatoes and that here. We're talking about actual groceries.
Yes, exactly. It should, I mean, it's going to help transform the nature of retail shopping. I mean, we've already seen this with self-checkouts in supermarkets.
Yes.
The next stage is not having to scan the goods on the exit. And it also has the potential to transform the back end of these sort of operations. I mean, there's a lot of friction in supermarkets and other retail operations at the moment in terms of inventory management. It's not done well, and this allows, you know, real-time inventory management and you know, as a result, leaner supply chains.
So you're listing now, presumably want to raise capital?
Well, so we've raised, $10.5 million as part of this process, and that'll fund some R&D efforts and some sales efforts that are basically geared towards these autonomous product lines.
And what markets are you in globally?
Well, so we're manufacturing in China and also selling in East Asia. We've got a sales presence in the US and in Europe, and an R&D presence in Israel. So it's very much a global company, but part of the reason we've listed on the ASX is we want to explore the opportunities that the emerging middle class in Asia has to offer in China, in India and whatnot.
And you went on the board, I think, about 9 months ago. Was that obviously through your connections with Israel when you were over there as ambassador? Yeah,
look, I did a lot of work with the tech sector in Israel when I was the ambassador, and I'm still a firm believer that the Australian tech sector can and should do better, and part of the way we'll do that is through exposure to the world's best, and Israel's got some of the best tech companies in the world.
So you're also you started at Killen Partners.
That's right. Yeah.
So you've got your day job.
I do. Yeah.
Now, what about all these reports today that you are reconsidering, or no, you are going to run for Wentworth again in this election? Can you confirm that for us on Ticky?
Unfortunately, I can't confirm it for you. I could say that, look, I am interested in public service and finding new ways to help the country. And if the Liberal Party, would like me to, put my hand up for a particular position or a particular seat, I'd certainly be keen.
If they asked you to put your hand up for Wentworth, would you run again?
Well, I won't deal with a hypothetical, but I am interested in pursuing, public office and running a political campaign again.
Yeah, well, I think I'll take that as a yes. So the thing is, you sort of went through it all. It must have been pretty traumatic for you and the family. I mean, you've moved there, haven't you?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So you're in the electorate now. Now it was won obviously by Karen Phelps, the independent. And what makes anybody think that it's going to be any easier come the election?
Well, I don't think it will be any easier, to be honest. It'll be when independents win a seat, it can be hard to wrest their grasp from there. It won't be easy. It wasn't easy in the by-election, but look, it's a seat that if the Liberals want to form government again, we have to win. So if
well, not only that, you'd said of all the seats in Australia, Wentworth surely should belong to a minister or somebody who has a good chance of being a minister. I mean, to think that seat has fallen to an independent, and what on earth does that say about the state of the Liberal Party?
Well, look, I think there was a sort of a perfect storm of events at work there in Wentworth. It was the manner of the departure of the previous member, who also happened to be the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, the high personal regard and appeal he had in Wentworth.
And what about the political... come on, Dave. What about the political stunt, which was right in the middle of your campaign, indeed the week before...
Which one? There were many.
Consider moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I mean, that was deliberately done for you. Surely you were the former ambassador to Israel. I mean, it's impossible, beggars belief that it wasn't done for you. And look at the cost of this stunt now.
Yeah, look, I don't agree that it was done for me, and I certainly wouldn't have wanted it done for that reason. But I mean, look, I think the Prime Minister said this at the time. He'd been the Prime Minister at the time for, I think, about 9 weeks or something like that. He wanted to review a number of Australian policy settings in the Middle East. This is one that the media's focused on. He also mentioned the Iranian nuclear deal and our defence.
But if not, the timing of it was appalling. It should have been after, surely, the by-election.
Well, there's always been a by-election going on in Australia in the last 12 months. You could always say there's a by-election.
Not one with the former ambassador to Israel. I mean, really. So, and now you've got this situation where, honestly, we had a trade deal with Indonesia, which is now on ice as a result of all this. It's been costly, hasn't it?
Look, I've seen those media reports. I haven't been in the room, you know, with Indonesian officials. I'm confident that, you know, an FTA in its nature is designed to be mutually beneficial to two countries. If the FTA is in Indonesian interests and it's in Australia's interests, we'll conclude the FTA, and I don't think it's going to be linked to other issues. All
right, OK. What sort of, coming back to safer ground, back to your chairing today, what sort of investors are you looking at for Shekel?
Well, we've got a good spread of investors. We've got some institutionals, we've got some retailers, we've got some mums and dads, and I think I mean, this tech sector more broadly that's listed in the ASX gives people, I think, a great opportunity to get exposed to some of the interesting technologies out there. Shekel Brainway is now, I think, the 19th Israeli technology company that's been listed on the ASX, and there have been some great performance.
Well, it puts us to shame, actually, doesn't it? And it's amazing, the story of Israel tech around the world.
It is great. I mean, they really do outperform, and it's partly for the, you know, unique geopolitical circumstances and things that we wouldn't want to replicate here in Australia, but they're certainly one of the most creative and innovative countries out there at the moment.
They sure are. So are we going to see you on the boards of, you know, a couple of others of these tech companies, Israeli tech companies? I
am supporting a number of other. I'm on the advisory board of one or two others, and I'm chairing Shekel Brainway. But look, I do really believe that helping, you know, expose the Australian tech sector to, you know, deep technology, the kind of the global mindset that Israeli technology companies have, will help improve our own startup and entrepreneurial sector here, and we do need to do that. That's where the economic future of Australia lies, in having a more innovative and entrepreneurial economy. So, you know, to the extent that exposure to Israeli companies helps us do that, I'm all for it.
All right. Well, Dave Sharma, it is super to have you on. Congratulations again on the listing, and I wish you all the best should you run.
Thanks so much, Ticky.
Nice to talk. OK. New parents would be able to take their paid parental leave in stages rather than all at once under changes announced by the government today. The changes are designed to make the scheme more flexible, but Kelly O'Dwyer admits some workplaces will not adopt the new scheme, the government not mandating the changes.
In her first Women's Economic Security statement, Kelly O'Dwyer was sending a message to young Australian women.
Back yourself. There are no limits on what you can achieve with hard work and perseverance.
The Minister is also seeking to assist that hard work with a $109 million package focusing on 3 areas.
Increasing workforce participation, building financial security, resilience and independence, and better earning potential.
$54.8 million will go to boosting workforce participation, including on flexibility.
For the first time, families will be able to split their government-funded parental leave pay into blocks of leave, allowing them to work in between.
But the government won't be forcing companies to adopt the flexible arrangements.
When it comes to workplaces, obviously, you know, it's up to each workplace to determine the flexibility arrangements that they have in that workplace.
Among the other changes, women would be able to access their superannuation early if they are victims of domestic violence. Labor says they'll look at the detail of that proposal.
But shifting poverty from middle age to old age for Australian women, that's not a solution to domestic violence.
Tanya Plibersek says the economic security statement did nothing substantial to tackle economic inequality.
This is about as disappointing as the year I got bathroom scales for Christmas. I really expected something a lot better.
One high-profile woman is doing just that, calling out what she says is bad behaviour from the Prime Minister. Pamela Anderson is taking Scott Morrison to task for laughing off her pleas to help Julian Assange.
Throw him a parade when he gets home.
You want to throw him a parade?
Well, no, first of all, but I've had plenty of mates who've asked me if they could be my special envoy to sort the issue out with Pamela Anderson.
In an open letter to Scott Morrison, the Baywatch star said the PM made smutty, unnecessary comments about a woman voicing her political opinion.
Should Scott Morrison apologise to Pamela Anderson?
I think the Prime Minister probably regrets the comments that he made, and I certainly know from a discussion that, you know, he didn't mean to cause any offence.
James O'Doherty, Sky News, Canberra.
What a pickle. After the break, CBA shares up 1% despite today's revelations at the Hayne Royal Commission. We'll get more from InvestSmart's Evan Lucas next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Yes, welcome back. Well, not a great day for the local market, closing down 0.4%. Tech stocks weighing down on the index, as we were saying, down over 2.7%. Financials didn't do so bad. It was the top performing sector today, up around 0.3%. And CBA, Commonwealth Bank, despite its chief executive and chair being dragged across the hot coals at the Royal Commission, closing up 1%. Well, for more, Evan Lucas, Chief Market Strategist at InvestSmart, joins me live from Melbourne. Evan, hello. You must have been following a bit of the Royal Commission. Now, how do you meld this with the share price performance today?
Yeah, look, I think the share price is independent of probably what was going on over in Sydney. And the reason I say that is that if you look at what's been going on inside CBA and actually the Big Four in general, the downside pressure has been quite strong, and they all moved in almost linear lockstep in that back half of the day. It was quite interesting. It was actually more to do with some movements that we saw offshore. So I'd probably put that to one side. What you would very much allude into it is if you have a look year to date, CBA is down 14.5%. NAB and ANZ are down around about sort of 16%. And if you look at Westpac, it's around sort of just shy of 17. So clearly this year has been a very detrimental year to the overall trading of what's been going on in the Big Four. And they're also seeing that not just what's going on at the Banking Royal Commission, but their overall loan growth is clearly slowing as well.
The idea that trailing commissions on the mortgage front might be under attack, might even be a thing of the past, say this time next year or the year afterwards. I mean, what sort of damage might that do to banks?
Yeah, and that's the next one. Mortgage trailing commissions are huge in terms of, particularly, it's not just the banks, but you look at those sort of institutions, providers that have come in and have been providing that services. So you then look at the mortgage choices of this world that have been providing that sort of second-tier opportunity into that space and get a trailing commission off the loans that they may have provided to, whether it be not just the Big Four banks, but any institution that's actually providing some form of lending facility and credit facility. So it would be a big change. I mean, again, the question becomes out of this, does it therefore mean that the banks therefore just terminate that side of it? Do they grandfather out certain contracts is also another question.
As I understand it, it's a lot of money, and the customers really don't know about it because it's all just you know, hidden in the interest rate that you get, isn't it?
Correct. That's right, and that's again, I mean, this is not just something that's come out of the Banking Royal Commission. This has been talked about probably, particularly since the housing-led recovery boom back in 2013 happened, which is that yes, you can go through a mortgage broker. However, you need to be aware that the fee that you are not paying them up front actually comes through the fee that they negotiate for you with the bank. So if you were to look at a standard variable mortgage rate that you could probably get over the last sort of 3 to 4 years, not including this year, you're probably looking between 3.75% to as high as 4.3%. But with a mortgage broker, it's between 4 and as high as 4.5, even as bad as 4.8. So you know that there's between as much as 25 basis points, even all the way up to almost 80 basis points of trailing commissions on what is a standard loan, 30 years. So you are talking about a substantial amount of money. Now, the catch to this, and what we're probably discussing, is how you untangle that, how you actually go about removing those trailing commissions inside and out of it. I mean, the change that they're discussing is now you do have to look at those mortgage brokers having and putting in an upfront flat fee. Now, what would that be? Would it be a fair $1,000? $5,000, which is basically sort of a very, very low end what a real estate agent charges the vendor for selling their home. So that's the next part of this is not just looking at it from that perspective. How does that kind of business go forward? You know, people do need some assistance with actually negotiating their home loan, but you're right, having it embedded inside the actual percentage that you're paying on your overall standard mortgage is not necessarily the right answer.
OK. Of course, we've got Westpac appearing, Brian Hartzer appearing tomorrow, Catherine Livingstone just finishing off as chair of CBA, her session tomorrow as well. To what extent will the market be sensitive to how Brian Hartzer goes, for example? Because he, of course, as a CEO, was there all through it, wasn't he?
He was, and not only that, he has probably the most sensitive book to this whole changes around, you know, lending practices, lending styles. Also the fact that Westpac is the only one of the Big Four that has realistically fought all of this tooth and nail to basically to the last sort of end. And that, I think, is something that Rowena Orr clearly likes to play on, and she will play that very hard. And the fact that why is the bank fought all of these movements all the way through to the end. It's gone through the courts, paid millions of dollars on that kind of level. And it's not just around what's going on at the Banking Royal Commission, it is around what's happened with AUSTRAC, around clearly the issues also around the interest rate sort of differentials we've had with the bank bill swap rate. All of that's been there. So Westpac has fought it, plus they had the largest exposure to New South Wales. So they have a very interesting question. We know that there has been issues around the home loan expenditure index that everybody keeps talking about, and the fact that they have been fairly regularly, and this is what was thrown out last week, as we discussed, I think, on this program last week, that $35 million fine. So they do have questions to ask, particularly around their lending standards, and I think that is what will be very heavily done, because unlike the other three, they have quite a horizontal structure with several different brands to sort of look at. Now, all of them have their own different brands. You've got, Bank West with CBA. But if you look at Westpac Group, they have several brands across several states with different ideas and different ways of running. So there is also other areas to sort of really push him on about how a Bank of Melbourne or a Bank of SA and St George compares to a Westpac itself.
All eyes on Westpac tomorrow. Evan Lucas, thank you very much for joining us and all that analysis. Terrific.
Thanks, Ticky.
Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, Solomon Lew, Chairman of Premier Investments and majorly disgruntled Myer shareholder. See you tomorrow night at 5 p.m. on free-to-air Channel 95, or tonight on Catch Up at 8 o'clock on Foxtel's Channel 604. Thanks for your company.